City, as we begin the hour, today's proverb.
The king who shuts his eyes during a famine in the land will soon see his ancestors.
Very wise.
The king who shuts his eyes when there's famine in the land will soon see his ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll not be in a dream. He'll have crossed over to the ancestors.
It'll be
lived experience.
one-on-one.
No one could translate. Because he has his eyes closed, then the ancestors will come to him in a dream and speak to him and wake him up and tell him, no, you need to go and address.
No.
You're saying this will be...
If you're looking at it from an architectural perspective, scale 1 to 1.
1 to 1.
Yes.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation. Our audience joining us now on KTN Home. We are also live streaming the show on SpiceFM KE, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and we are on SpiceFM around the country: Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, Nakuru, Eldoret, Nyeri, and Malindi. The conversation now moves into the legal side of the Constitution, the political side of the legal side of the constitutional side of the legals, depending on how you want to put whether the adjective before the verb or the noun before the proverb, whatever you want to do. This is all coming after CT's proverb. Joining us in the studio now is Senior Counsel Abdikadir Mohamed. He is an advocate. He is what he told us some time back, a retired politician.
Indeed.
He was a member of parliament for Mandera Central. And during the tenure of his last tenure as an MP, he was also the chairman of the Parliamentary Select Committee on Constitution Review. This is the man who midwifed the 2010 Constitution. And then he helped implement this Constitution by advising the president as the president's legal advisor. Good morning, Abdikadir.
Hi.
Good to have you in the show.
Asante.
We call that the hot seat, but because you're a friend of this show, we are just going to make it...
we call it the warm seat.
The warm seat, yes. It's just the warm seat.
Yes.
2010 Constitution, we were celebrating a decade of the Constitution last year.
Yeah.
And when we were talking about it, we were also looking at there are things that had come out of the Committee of Experts.
Yes.
And there are things that were negotiated by politicians in Naivasha.
Yes.
And there were politicians who've said, but you see, in Naivasha, we went and included one or two things that we knew were, kind of time bombs here and there.
Yes.
And we hoped that later we could deal with them, just so that we get the thing off the ground.
Yes.
Is it true that there were some things that were negotiated in Naivasha that have now come to bite us?
No, thank you. Thank you for having me, and good morning. I think Naivasha was supposed to be a political negotiation. We would not have the Constitution without the politicians discussing, negotiating. Because remember, we had very large debates. We had very large discussions around very difficult issues, with people taking very strong, very considered views. Not because one view was wrong or the other was right, but because you had people holding one view and others holding another view. And a number of the issues were technical and could be sorted out by the lawyers in the Committee of Experts, or probably I need to back a little bit. We started with collecting views across the country, CKRC, even before the latter bit of the process.
Yep.
So Professor Guy's team collected views, held discussions. We had bombers. So by the time we were coming to Naivasha or the Accord, we had a huge body of the views of Kenyans.
Yep.
Now those views were collected and collected into chapters, proposals essentially. Now a number of those proposals were let me give you an example. Do we go with a presidential system or a parliamentary system? Now, it's not wrong to say I want a parliamentary system. It's also not wrong to say I want to go for a presidential system. But we will have one constitution, so we have to go with one view or the other. So those debates, those that were not technical or were not contentious, or those that were purely technical and were not contentious, those were all agreed on and fashioned by the COE through the harmonized draft ABCD. But there were large political discussions that were of necessity to be debated, negotiated at Naivasha. And that was the way it was designed. So, for example, the form of government would take, representation. There were 3 or 4 large items which the roadmap bill said must be negotiated by the politicians. And those are the discussions we had. Yes.
Why was this insistence that they must be negotiated by politicians?
Because you have 2 levels of making decisions. One is directly by the people, and 2 is indirectly by the representatives, elected representatives of the people. Number 1. Number 2, most of these pushes were political in nature. So for example, whether we choose a parliamentary or a presidential system has political roots, so to speak. So there are those who would feel I would be better served politically by a parliamentary system. And there are those who would feel, no, I would be better served by a presidential system. We already have what the views of the people are. But for you to come to an agreement, it is very difficult to tell the Kenyan people, go and negotiate and discuss. You can take them a point to decide on, but it will be very difficult to say, go and debate among yourselves and come to an agreement. We collected their views. Yes, sorry.
I'm in agreement with you. What I am actually trying to figure out in my head is where the technical teams came in.
Yes.
The bureaucrats, the people who, the professionals who understand the academic as well as the operationalizations of these systems.
Yes.
Where did they come in?
Good question.
Yes.
So first, remember we had the Guy team.
Yes.
Professor Guy was an expert in constitutional making.
Yes.
Very well renowned across the world. And the team he had, those commissioners were almost all expert in those areas. Then we had the Bomas process, where we had actually sector teams, thematic teams with experts in each of those areas. So by the time we're coming to the 2005 referendum, we actually had an almost finished product. What broke the back of the camel was the politics. Now, that is what led us to 2007. From 2007, then we had the accord. You remember we had the agenda 4 items and the discussions. So we had those negotiations, and the idea was to bring the country together. And one of the large elephants in the room was, let's get the constitution off the table so that we at least have a constitution agreed on. Because the constitution was also the key to unlocking a number of those issues. So then the items we had so then we have the committee of experts, made up of experts, different chapters dealing with different experts. So for example, Professor D will tell you he was a consultant on the finance chapter, public finance chapter. The South African professor who was leading, who was the member of the Constitutional Commission, the COE, was an expert on the chapter on finance. That's why our treasury is called National Treasury, because the South African one is also called National Treasury. So they have devolved units. So there was a lot of expertise that went into the technical side. The hot political buttons, those ones we had to have PNU and ODM and their affiliates sit across the table from each other, because if they were not going to agree, if the politicians were not going to come together and agree, we would not have a constitution. And the South African, now we also had the South African constitutional process to borrow from. And one of the key things they kept on repeating, the experts from there and many other places in the world, is you must have political settlement before you take this to the people. Otherwise, you'd really divide the country even further. And remember, 2007, we were not comfortable as we are now. We had just killed each other. We were worried. I don't know whether you recall, but there was a time we really were all praying that Kofi Annan does not take a flight.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, it was really tough. So yes.
So 10 years later,
Yes.
now you can maybe declassify some of the information on what was happening in Naivasha, and you can tell us
Hopefully.
what came out of Naivasha.
Yes.
Was it a proper political settlement?
Yes.
Or was it just, okay, guys, there's everybody, the eyes of the world are on us. Let's just cobble this thing together and let's go back to Nairobi. and pretend that we have white smoke, but we actually don't have white smoke?
No, we really negotiate. We were not that nice and generous, most of us.
Yeah.
We really negotiated very hard. You remember? So I'll give you an example. We had to kick out from the compound Moses Kuria and Miguna. And those are not guys who will be nicely chatting. The reason is because they felt so strongly about their positions. So you remember, every negotiator or every head of a delegation had a very strong team behind. I don't know whether you remember, but the Serena discussions, the heated debates between RUTO and Karua, those went to Naivasha, and they were the most active participants of the debates. If you look at the Hansard, because all our discussions are on record, and all every contribution is there on Parliament's Hansard. So the discussions were very, very, very heated. Sometimes went all the way to 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. And every clause was debated and resolved by resolution with a proposal and a seconder. So there are times we were going to go home the next morning, packed to leave, then because things had basically gotten too heated. Yes.
So, I mean, just as you're describing it, it was clear that you kind of like, you crossed all the T's, you dotted all the I's.
Yeah.
There was this compounded conversation to make sure that everything was,
Yes.
put together properly.
Yes.
Would you then have envisioned
Yes.
that some years down the line,
Yes.
there would then be a suggestion to alter all of this that you had done?
Okay. So I was hoping at a personal level that by now we would have resolved many of these. I didn't expect this time would be where we are in terms of our constitutional development. I think, and there are many reasons for that. ICC being one of them. But let me go back a little bit. The constitution is a product of a negotiated settlement. So to that extent, it's not a perfect document. You have to give and take. So it's not an ideal document. And the best example is the Senate we have. The Senate we have is a mongrel. It's a very interesting institution, purely because it's the product of a negotiated settlement. Remember, ODM wanted a very strong Senate because ODM wanted a parliamentary system. PNU did not want to have a parliamentary system or a presidential system. PNU wanted a hybrid system. So one large political faction wants a very strong Senate. The other large political faction wants to have no Senate.
Yep.
You have to negotiate, and each has to give and take. What you have is a weak Senate. So you will have circumstances like that, where you have an institution that is not as ideal as you would expect because of the fact that you have to negotiate and give and take. So that I'm not too worried about. And one of the things I was looking forward to, if there was going to be any amendment to the constitution, is, for example, to rectify that, to see whether now that we have had the experience with devolution, can we give the Senate teeth? And because there were two senators, the late Mzee Haji and my friend, former AG, I was really hoping for that. And there was nothing to do with the Senate and its powers. If anything, it was watered down a little bit.
It was even weakened further.
Yes.
Are we going into a break?
Not yet.
Oh, good. Now, when you look back, hindsight sometimes can be very useful in understanding a situation. What part in your mind did personal interest take in this entire discussion and the impasse that we witnessed and which has brought us to where we are today? And what part did the public and national interest take in these discussions and the eventual compromise?
That's a very good question. Now, obviously, there are some interesting things. For example, remember all of us who were in the hall were members of the National Assembly.
Yes.
So we're not members of the Senate. I suspect if what was being, even though it was a vested institution, it was already there, but if we were dealing with the powers of the National Assembly, I don't think we would have made it that weak. In other words, my friend Wetangula and many of the Senate, my friend Orengo, who were members of our committee, did not foresee themselves being the members of the Senate when we were negotiating away the powers of the Senate.
It would be somebody else.
Because so that was one of the things that really made us almost break off. And we had a smaller team of the 27 to negotiate now representation and the Senate. And among the smaller team were both Orengo and Senator Orengo and Senator Wetangula, very brilliant lawyers on both sides, on opposite sides. Remember, Wetangula then was on the PNU side through for the So that is one. The other is that especially at the presidential campaign level, most politicians, especially at that level, see the constitution or constitution making or agitation for constitutional amendment essentially as an organizing principle for their campaigns, as opposed to whether it's good or bad for the country. So I can bet you my last dollar, if it was switched,
if the tables were turned, yes,
RUTO and Raila would take opposite sides. Nothing would stop RUTO from being the guy who agitates for BBI, and nothing would stop Raila from being the guy who is defending the constitution. So we've often, if it was politically expedient.
Right. So we've often said a lot of these decisions, I mean, from our perception, my perception, is that a lot of these decisions are taken at the time for that which suits you as an individual, just like what you've said. So, I mean, how then, for those who are in the audience now, looking at this show taking place, how are they supposed to take it, knowing that this person may have made this decision or is rallying the psyche of Kenyans against something that is only suiting them at the moment?
Eternal vigilance. And you're precisely right. So we need an educated electorate. We need institutions like the judiciary, like the media, that need to play the guardrail functions. We need experts and opinion leaders in society, because politicians are the leaders of society in that arena. But they're not the only leaders of society. We have very many other sites in society that lead, that shape debate, and the media. And I'll be honest with you, one of the biggest disappointments in the BBI process has been the media. Absolutely.
Why have they been in disappointment?
It's okay. You drive the dagger home.
No.
It's okay.
Do not soften the blow.
No. There are certain institutions in this country that have a very stellar record in terms of which direction the lawyers, media, and many others. But in this particular debate, the media has looked at this through, in my opinion, through the prism of the 2022 politics. And of course, there's quite a bit in this debate that was about the 2022 politics. But they ought not to have, in my opinion, those good people in that honorable profession ought to have looked at it a bit deeper and seen the trees from the forest. But let me come back to the good lady's question. So yes, it is true that quite a number of politicians, like many human beings, look out for themselves, but we need to have other sectors that look and say, yes, this is you looking out for all of us, but this is you looking out for yourself.
But now, those other sectors were also very, very active in this particular BBI conversation. Because you'll find professionals who've come out to say, yes, we have a problem and we need to address the problem. Remember when the handshake happened and then the BBI task force was formed and the 9 points were put forth, there are people who agreed that yes, we need to address this. And throughout the BBI process, there have been professionals who, in their own individual capacities, have come out to say, I think we ought to discuss this. So now how do we differentiate between those who actually see a point and those who are doing it to score their own political points?
So discourse, of course, is necessary, and the whole idea of having the debate is so that people air their views. And broadly, by the way, in many of these things, there is no right or wrong view. It's really looking for what system to take, so long as you are. So, for example, anyway, I'll come to that later. But so, for example, when you reduce the entire debate to RUTO's view, the Honorable RUTO's view, or former Prime Minister Raila's view, and it's basically a contest between the two, that, in my opinion, lessens the debate, because this really is about our lives and about posterity. So that's really what I meant in that sense.
To that extent, I completely agree with you in terms of, just making the whole BBI conversation be
and
about...
I understand they are popular and you have to sell the paper. That I absolutely do understand. But yes, it's the same debate about Facebook and big media in that sense, and how they deal with conflict in society. To try and
we're actually in agreement with you here, because
completely.
We've actually raised that issue ourselves, about ourselves.
I was worried the seat would get hotter.
No. We've raised the same issue ourselves, about ourselves, on many occasions.
This is the Situation Room. In the room is Eric Latif, Ndu Oko, C.T. Muga, and Abdikadir Mohamed, Senior Counsel, who was the chair of the Parliamentary Select Committee on Constitution Review, and then the chair of the Committee for the Implementation of the Constitution in Parliament, later advisor to the President on legal matters. Talking about Constitution, safeguarding the Constitution, and then the lived experience. We had a conversation with Jeremiah Kioni, who's the chair of the Implementation Oversight Committee in the National Assembly now, and he said, look, some of the matters that are in the BBI, we had already discussed, even started having a conversation in Parliament, because our lived experience is showing us that we still haven't sorted out our political issue. One of those things is, okay, what happens to the runner-up in a presidential election? Why do people support that person? Does that person represent hopes, aspirations of a people? So do we just extinguish those hopes? So what happens to that person? Among the things that the BBI was also attempting to address, what happens with the issue of oversight and holding ministers accountable for the work that they are doing? Should their ministers not be coming to Parliament to respond to questions? So all these things, and you've seen them in the BBI, do they make sense from your point of view?
So thank you. So we chose one system, and when you choose a system or one form, there are advantages and disadvantages of that form as opposed to the other. And there is a tendency to skip from that form and look for, pick and choose what you like from different systems. That's why we had a hybrid system. Remember, we started with a parliamentary system.
Yeah.
And very quickly got into a presidential system without having to elect the president. So Jomo Kenyatta was never elected as a president. He was president for 15 years. So if we chose the presidential system, and that's our constitution, I think we should abide by our constitution. If after many years we decide we want to go parliamentary, there's no problem with taking the country through the right process and going for a parliamentary system. So that's number two. You can hold ministers very accountable with our current setup, but members of parliament want to become ministers. Yep. So the push for that, in my opinion, has less to do with getting ministers to be more accountable, because nothing is stopping my good friend and brother and all my other colleagues in the National Assembly from holding current ministers accountable, but they have not held any minister accountable. The National Assembly is supposed to vet cabinet secretaries when they're coming in. I have never heard of, other than once, anybody being rejected, and there are very many who are not fit to be, in my opinion, ministers. So it's not lacking in the capacity to hold accountable as more to do with senior members of parliament wanting to have the opportunity, one, to become MPs, and two, to have ministers as their colleagues, so that instead of going to look for them in their offices when they're having tea at the parliamentary coffee, talk to them and sort one or two items. It's more comfortable as a member of parliament when your colleague is also a minister. You don't have to go look for some stranger you have never met. But that's the system we have carried. The other item was the loser in a presidential system. That's more popular among the public than having MPs as ministers, because they have hopes and aspirations in this particular person, and they want that person to have some say. But then again, that is the system we have come with. If you had a parliamentary system, you will have the most senior members of the opposition in parliament as a government in waiting, and the winning party forming government, with the prime minister being a member of parliament and the ministers being that is that system. This system we have says you want to run for parliament, it is a separate arm of government from the presidency. And when you are president, you are not a member of parliament. And it is one person who is running. You either win or lose. If you win, you become the president. If you lose, when you lose the World Cup, we don't say these guys who are number 2. How do we just throw them out? You win or you lose. This is you have won. You have won. You have the right to run the country. You have lost. You have lost. You might have members of parliament and you might have members of your party in parliament. And by the way, it is possible in our current system that the party that wins the presidency is not the party that is in power in parliament. So that it is possible for the Honorable Raila Odinga to win, for example, if he's running in the next election, while another party has the majority of members of parliament. Better example, we had Nairobi, Kisumu, Mombasa, the largest cities, run by ODM in the last term. Those are governments. So that is the way it's supposed. So getting this person to come and serve in parliament, in my opinion, might be useful for that particular person. But ideally, we have a separation of powers. The executive and the legislature are two separate arms of government. If you are the majority in the legislature, you are the majority. If you are the minority, you have a government office. You are the leader of the minority. It's a parliamentary office, and ideally, key public decisions ought not to be made without the key leadership of parliament, which includes the majority and the minority. So if we were to look at it, especially from the institutional arrangement in parliament, that's the way it's supposed to. If we were to go back to the parliamentary system, then the prime minister essentially doesn't run as a president or a prime minister. The party runs, and the leader of the party becomes the prime minister. That's why if that particular party on their own can remove that individual and put up another person, as happened in South Africa.
Are you saying that those concerns that were raised by first the brothers, and then supported by some of their supporters, that the winner take all, first past the post and everything is divisive?
So first of all, even after BBI, it would have been first past the post. That would still have been our system. Basically, that if you are going for a parliamentary seat or an MCA seat or the presidential seat, the person who is first past the post takes the winner. Even our system now, for the presidential election, we have 50% plus 1. Now, whether getting the leader of the loser in a presidential, or the runner-up, let's say, in a presidential election, getting that person a formal office will make things more inclusive. I don't know. Do we need inclusivity? By all means. Has the Constitution tried to address inclusivity in many places, in many areas? Absolutely. Have we implemented those? Rarely. So inclusivity is an important issue. We need more inclusivity as a country. Getting Eric Latif, who lost in an election a fat office, whether that is inclusivity, I don't know.
You know, there's an element of discussion that I don't hear much of, but it's something that is considered in other countries.
Yes.
What do you do with a former prime minister or a former president, especially if they're still politically active? Because our system doesn't seem to cater for that at all. It's like you stop being president, you stop being prime minister, you retire.
We give them fat checks. We take care of them very well.
Now, the reason why I ask this is because the situation we had in Kenya is we had a former prime minister
Yes.
who was not elected member of any of the houses,
Yes.
but still a party leader.
Yes.
Now, it is that particular position
Yes.
that, together with others, that has brought us to this discussion, which eventually led to the BBI. Because
Yes.
here is someone
Yes.
who is not necessarily active
Yes.
in politics or in parliament or in any of the bodies, but still has a very big say on what happens in the country.
Yes.
And I'm saying that if a position was offered, let's say, for instance, we said any former president or prime minister automatically becomes a senator. It means that even after your term, you are somebody who has a political office, you can be addressed. But when it is left vague, it is not any different, or it doesn't bode well, just as this particular current system that we have.
I see an issue though, CT.
Please.
The definition of former. I think we're still having that conversation today with giving the former vice president and the former prime minister their package. Because we are asking, have they retired? Are they out? If you're a former prime minister, yes, but you're still vying to be president, you're still active, you're still a party leader, you're still doing all these things and you're seeking elective office, then are we calling you a former prime minister?
But you are a
Or
former prime minister.
only because you no longer are occupying the office of prime minister because we abolished it? Or are we saying that you are, like Abdikadir, a former politician who's retired
I mean,
voluntarily?
Let me ask the question. If I was a former headmaster and I retired at the age of retirement and I have a pension and then I become an MP, am I still not entitled to the benefits that that will accrue from my being
That
an
is
MP?
fine. However, if
Yes.
you're a former headmaster and you're still teaching in the school and you're still looking to advise the headmaster, you're still active in teaching in the school. Are you a former headmaster?
Actually, if I'm still teaching, it's teaching, not in the school.
Yes.
If I was working for the government,
Yes.
I retire from government,
Yes.
I now work in the private sector.
Yes.
What am I saying? I'm simply bringing in the debate of the differences.
Yes.
Here you are active in this position.
Yes.
What they're being considered for, if you want to expand the debate, should we look at their position as prime minister, vice president, or should we take into account the times when they were members of parliament? Because even that one comes to the package. What do we look at? What do we bring in? What do we leave out?
I'm
Ma-
saying,
ma-
and before
yeah,
you come in,
so-
Abdikadir,
yes,
I'm
yes,
saying
yeah.
that we should look at you are former and you're no longer active.
Yes.
So if we are to say we give you a seat, we are giving you a seat because now you are no longer going out there campaigning, seeking the same position, but you have left, like Uhuru Kenyatta has served 2 terms as president. He's not campaigning again to be president. He's not campaigning to be MP. Give him a seat in the Senate, fine.
What
But
if
if he wants to campaign to be an MP, that seat in the Senate, X. Abdikadir, what do you think?
Yeah,
What do you
thanks.
think?
Yes, my view is again we have a system we have agreed on, and that system says if you are a parliamentarian, you are a parliamentarian. If you are in the executive, you are in the executive. If you are a candidate for president,
Yes.
you want to lead the executive.
Yes.
You don't want to serve in parliament.
Yes.
Because if you want to serve in parliament, you will go and get elected as a member of parliament. If you are in the executive and you win and you serve either 1 term or serve 2 terms, there's a very good retirement package for president, for deputy president, for vice president, for prime minister, all of them. All the current guys who are retired have very good packages with offices catered for by the public, with security detail and cars and everything. So that you as a former leader don't fall into hard times and so on. We respect you and we honor you, and that is the way it is. If you served 1 term and you want to run for another term, it's also fine. You want to come back and get elected. So Obama, highly respected. Trump wants to come back and win that seat again. That is the way it is on that side of the executive. And on the parliament side, if you are the minority, again highly respected, with a government office, with other than the salary as member of parliament, you have an office of the minority, you have a budget for that office, and then we have political parties. You can run your political party and be a leader for your political party, so that you use your influence to get your political party back into it. Maybe fundraise for the political party, ABCD. In my opinion, it's not really a deal breaker to have that person catered for. What I think is important is, how do we ensure that the millions of Kenyans who voted for this person, who voted for this person, are not excluded from their rights as citizens.
And that's where I see this happening, Abdikadir, because of all of this conversation around power and who is included. We're not talking about the inclusivity of Kenyans. We're not talking about the inclusivity of development of the country. We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about a very small group of individuals who are working on grabbing this power and holding on to it, and forgetting about the millions of Kenyans for whom they should be fighting for governance over.
There you go. Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. And that is where the problem is, that the fear is that if I am the leader of a very large party, and we have a very bitter fight for power with my sister here, and I win, then I take it on her supporters and make sure that nobody from her side of the political divide sees any positivity from government, whether it is jobs or services or ABC. I, in fact, go further and tell all my supporters that in government, we are the ones in government. If you are seen talking to X or the supporter of X, you are
an enemy of
you are doing a disservice to my government. That's where the problem is. And that the Constitution tried to resolve in making sure that, look, you as a citizen, you don't need the blessings of a party or to be in government. Remember, during the Moi regime, Moi used to say, look, I will tell you, we'll deliver these services when funds get available. Yeah. And when I'm campaigning in Muranga to get a seat, power will come in and electricity will be, poles will be delivered overnight. So to try and ameliorate that is why we get devolution. So that irrespective of who is in power, a certain chunk of public resources go to every corner of the country, whether you are in opposition or in government. And that decision making is also taken to the law, so that irrespective of whether you are in government at the national level, at your county, definitely the majority political party or the majority political view will be the one determining, as opposed to some DC sent by Moi from Nairobi, who decides you are not following Mutukufu's footsteps and we will not give you your birth certificate if you're yes. Yes.
Is devolution being supported, Abdikadir?
No. We have had two large fights in the last few years at the national level politically. One is BBI, and the other was the fight in the Senate about the formula for divvying up resources. Yep. Both of them was a push to claw back. On BBI essentially was a push to claw back from in terms of political decision making and resources, because in BBI was the 70 seats, and those 7 seats essentially were supposed to pull back power back to central Kenya and to Nairobi, so that decision making at the National Assembly and at the Senate are more on numbers and population as opposed to the fringes. If you heard the president, he said the other day, when Kibra and Mathare, you have poor people and you have 100,000 voters and they are getting 100 million shillings, and you have another constituency that has 10,000. That essentially is the debate about BBI. That is the debate. And it's not a debate that started with BBI. At independence, there was a very strong dichotomy between Majimbo and the centralized system. And there was a very strong debate. And the story that, and it was delaying independence. And the story told that Mzee Kibaki and a few other bright fellas like Mboya told this was this, look, and they were in Kanu. Kadu and the settlers were trying to divide the nationalists. Let's accept this Katiba the way it is, with regionalism and stuff. And then we'll be in power and we'll sort it out. And that came to pass. That in a few years, those debates was put aside, and the Katiba we ended up with a few years later was exactly what Kanu had wanted. And this is exactly the same process. We got the Katiba done, and now we want to go back to bring back power to the center.
Abdikadir, let me ask you this question. Huh? Is there any merit in this discussion that keeps coming up about the numbers? That when you're talking, say, CDF,
Yes.
it is the same amount?
Yes.
Because that's the argument that you hear.
Yes.
Is there any merit in
Yes,
that argument?
yes, there is.
One man, 1 shilling, 1 kilometer, 1 shilling.
There is absolute merit.
Yes.
In the sense that ideally your vote should be of the same weight as a country.
Yes.
So that 10,000 votes and 1 vote are not equivalent. So that is absolutely relevant. There is the other side of that coin, which is that, so generally speaking, constituencies should be as close to the mean in terms of the number as possible.
Yes.
The other side of the coin is that you as a Kenyan, you are being a citizen should, broadly speaking, also entitle you to roughly the same level of services. You understand? So that if I am a citizen in Nairobi, and if I am a citizen elsewhere, not the very rich fellows or the very poor, but broadly speaking, the average citizen should have a similar level of access, because ideally representation is about services. So healthcare, water, roads, power, all those things, because the MP or government, no representation, no taxation without representation, and government services. So those two. So if you look purely from the point of view that we should all, one man, one vote, you have a situation where Starehe in Nairobi has very many people.
It does.
North Hor has very few people.
But the area is huge.
Now, North Hor is 35,000 square kilometers. Nairobi is 600 square kilometers.
Yes.
The entire Nairobi.
The entire Nairobi.
Yes.
Now, the guy who is representing Starehe represents many people. But roads are done. The hospitals are there.
Infrastructure
there
is in
power.
place.
There are schools.
They have amenities.
They have amenities. The fellow in North Hor, traveling from one end of his constituency to the other is 400 kilometers. No roads. So the lady who is giving birth the Kenyan woman who is giving birth in some village in North Hor deserves to have the same level of access to healthcare as the lady in Starehe constituency.
Sure.
And that is where I thought devolution was supposed to come in.
There you go. And so when you fight devolution or the devolved funds like CDF and say because you are few on that side, you should have exactly the same numbers, that is true, but the other truth is also there.
Again, this is where now the equalization fund also came in.
And the equalization
to balance this.
Absolutely. And that's why I was telling you, implementation has been lacking because the equalization fund has never been operationalized. Yes. And it's supposed to have had a sunset clause. So 10 years down the line, nothing.
Not started.
Still has not been
it only
done.
has 10 years to go.
And it has 10 years to go, yes. Yes.
This question has been posed, but I would like to hear it from you.
Yeah.
So the constitution as it is currently, is it then able to deliver, then through implementation, a lot of these issues that we are looking at as it currently is? And if not, is it necessary to alter it, or are there other things then that can be suggested, debated and implemented to allow some of these things now happen?
Yes to both.
Yeah.
Yes, to a large extent, the Constitution was trying to answer those questions. That we are a country that is made up of very many ethnicities. We need to be united. We have diversity. We have different levels of development. And so the Constitution tried to answer those. For example, in setting up the equalization fund, which was essentially to try and ensure that in 20 years we have had sufficient infrastructure investment to allow those people now to have and these are not problems that we have on our own only. I mean, in Australia, for example, certain members of parliament are entitled to choppers because of the size of the territory.
Yeah.
So then in terms of inclusivity, there is a very strong push to remember the debate about the face of Kenya.
Yep.
To show that, for example, in the military command or in the way we distribute government offices, appointment offices, whether it is gender or regional, there is a lot of push in that, and then there's devolution. Mm-hmm. Can we make it better? By all means, but at least if we had implemented it faithfully, we would not be where we are now. Now, most of the debate about those resources, about devolved resources, have you asked yourself why the people who are very strong on that never question national government resources? Because national government resources is opaque. You know how much CDF goes to every constituency. You know how much every county gets in terms of devolved funds. You don't know how much any county gets from the national government. And 85% of the resources are with the national government.
Yep.
I can assure you, almost all the marginalized communities don't get as much as Kiambu gets from national government. But you don't have the numbers. If you look at employment numbers, I can assure you certain communities are far much overrepresented in terms of the national government, especially at the higher echelons. But those are opaque numbers and figures. That is the inclusivity that we don't need an amendment for. And the sweeteners, you had asked me about the sweeteners don't need any amendment, in my opinion. The sweeteners can be sorted out even now. And we don't need to amend the Constitution to take our levels for devolution to 35%. We don't need to amend the Constitution to give a tax holiday to young investors. We don't need to amend the Constitution to give people who have loans from HELB to give them a 4-year break, and many of the others don't really require a constitutional amendment.
Abdikadir, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been an interesting conversation.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.